Um, Thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. We will start the session in 2 minutes as we are still waiting a couple of colleagues to join. And yeah, on behalf of the World Bank team and on the H2Global, we are very happy to have you all here, and we will start very soon.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Shalhalak. I'm an energy specialist at SMAP, and I'm really glad to be part of the hydrogen team at SMAP, and I will be starting this discussion today. I'm really happy to be here because we're discussing right today about auctions. And auctions has been a really important mechanism on energy transition in different levels. As we know, solar, wind, and we always, when you think about hydrogen, people always think about renewables and what we learned about this technology, how they have developed, could be applied to also develop the clean hydrogen, right? The question is that differently of this technology, we cannot pass to the demand side, this difference of cost of renewable and non-renewable clean hydrogen. So we have this gap between what the demand is willing to pay and the supply side. So when you think about clean hydrogen, you have different challenges. One is how to match, how to choose what's the lowest supply cost, what's the demand willing to pay the most for the clean hydrogen, and what's this gap, and how I can pay and how I can fulfill this gap to make the match and make these projects actually happen. As we know, and was published in the last flagship of the bank, we know that there is we have a lot of the, projects that are in the process of being discussed, but we don't have projects that arrived in the financial investment decision. So the auction can be a mechanism to match this to two sides and also to fill this gap, this price gap that was also identified, one of the most challenging um, things or issues to actually make the clean hydrogen projects to happen. And as we know, the hydrogen, the H2Global mechanism is one of the most innovative that try to learn and try to fill this gap, looking in the best way our auction mechanism that has double side. It means that they want to choose what's the most efficient supply demand and want to bridge this gap to match supply and demand. So the webinar today, it's a comprehensive overview of the results of the pilot action of the H2Global mechanism. So it allows us to learn a little bit more about this mechanism itself and understand what these results means for developed countries, but also thinking about developing countries, what we, from the looking on the developing perspective, can learn and how we can benefit for this kind of mechanism. The goal of this is to ramp up the investment on clean hydrogen. That's one of our main goals. And for discussing this with us, we have John Clank, it's a pleasure to be with you here today. And he is a program lead of the H2Global Foundation, and he coordinates the H2Global Knowledge Hub, which is a public funded research program on the clean hydrogen economy. In the previous position, he worked as an industrial transformation expert at the Berlin-based Business Association and as a product manager at the insurance company Allianz. For his political science PhD, he also researched the role of emerging powers in international climate change negotiations of the German Institute for Global and Area Studies in Hamburg, Germany. So he's with us today, and I don't want to take much of your time, Jen, because we're really interested to hear about what is it and how the details about how it works, what's the results, and what are the food for thought for us looking for developing countries we need to have. What's the benefit, what we can learn for it, and how it can be used for investment and bring investment to our economies as well. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michelle, for the kind introduction. So, as Michelle has already said, my name is Jan Klenke. I'm a program lead here at H2Global. I'm based here in Hamburg, as the whole foundation is, but despite being based in Germany, we understand ourselves as truly global. Today, I am happy to introduce you to the results of the H2Global pilot auction. But before I jump right into the results, let me say a couple of words about the mechanism itself. And of course, as it's always the case, now my clicker doesn't work, but that is no problem. We'll change the setting real quick, and then that's fine. One note in advance, if I cough a little, I apologize for that in advance. I'm still recovering from a summer flu. However, that should not stop us. So first of all, what is the H2Global Foundation? The H2Global Foundation is a non-profit foundation that is dedicated to fostering the international cooperation on hydrogen and raising awareness about the H2Global mechanism. So the foundation is supported by 71 private companies that give operational support to us and work with us in working groups. And we also receive funds from philanthropy and governments to do work on research, developing the instrument, and doing outreach activities. And that's exactly why you hear from me today, although the auctions are implemented by H2Go, which is a 100% subsidiary of the foundation. H2Go receives separate funds that are used to cover the cost of difference that you will hear quite a bit today. First, a bit more about the foundation. We are active around the globe, and this map shows you some of the engagements that we are having. So we have countries with funding commitments in blue on this map. This includes Canada, the Netherlands, and Germany. We also have countries where we have active discussions about implementing the H2Global mechanism. That includes Belgium, Austria, UAE, and Australia. And some other countries that you see here on the map where we have some more engagements in terms of knowledge exchange and developing mechanisms in various capacities that could aid the hydrogen economy. In terms of research, I also briefly want to advertise this because everyone is always talking about the auction mechanism, but we're also doing these research activities that are broadly encapsulated in two programs. One is what we call the H2Global Knowledge Hub. That is a program that does all kinds of analyses on the hydrogen economy and engages our donors and knowledge partners. For example, Michelle is one of these knowledge partners in working groups where we discuss reports that we then publish annually. The other program that we have is called H2Global Meets Africa, where we have partnered up with the Fraunhofer IEE and the OTH Regensburg University. This program, and you see a little map here, tries to discuss potentials of clean hydrogen production in Africa beyond just the regular where is most sun and wind power available, but include other aspects as well.
Okay, wonderful.
The person who just talked, if you could. Yeah, thanks.
Excuse me, just a minute. Please, everybody, mute the microphone. Yeah.
No worries. So a couple of words more on the Knowledge Hub. So this includes, for example, that we have created on our website a subsection that is called the Knowledge Hub, where we try to really present different kinds of knowledge regarding the hydrogen economy. Currently, it still has some basic knowledge available, but it will be developed further to have more information present on the website. We also have these 3 working groups, which regularly have a participation of more than 20 companies. Each this year, the focus topics are infrastructure finance, demand for hydrogen, where we look into hubs in particular and how they can be mobilized. And we have a working group on auction designs. Each of the working groups produces a report. They will be published this fall, so please stay tuned for these reports. And I already mentioned the different knowledge partners. The working groups, real quick, have this system where they meet regularly, and I will save you the details on this, but it's a very structured process to arrive at these reports. To just round this up real quick on Africa, before jumping into the mechanism that you're all here for. Here we looked into 5 dimensions, including renewable hydrogen commitment, water and renewable energy potentials, domestic anchor demands, export infrastructure and country risk of these countries, to come up with these clusters of countries, including what we call front-runner countries in green on the map. Blue countries are what we call upcoming stars, and some countries with a strong foundation to engage in the clean hydrogen economy in this turquoise. We can engage in this, of course, a little bit later, but now let's start with the mechanism. What are we generally trying to do? Most of you will be aware that the hydrogen economy suffers from a chicken and egg problem, where demand and supply are currently not meeting each other in terms of willingness to pay and cost that is available. So what we're trying to do with the H2Global mechanism is to simulate a market to create a market eventually. That implies on the supply side that we're simulating long-term demand at a cost-covering basis, and on the demand side, we're simulating an existing supply at market-based pricing, i.e. a liquid market. And this hopefully leads to an acceleration of the market creation. This implies that we hand out long-term contracts for the supply side, which then has a multi-year fixed price and terms in form of a contract. So here we're not just handing out a grant agreement as some other auctions are doing, but what the H2Global mechanism does is directly produces an off-take agreement for suppliers. We then have short-term sales agreements on the demand side. In the first auction, this is scheduled to be a year, in which we sell these standard-sized batches to standardized contract terms. And these have the advantage that we create a lot of price signals about the current willingness to pay. Think of it as snapshots each year that we produce, what off-takers are willing to pay and think they can pay on for the pilot auction on the European market. There's a couple of positive externalities associated with the mechanism. This includes that our contractual frameworks have to solve some of the certification regulation issues, and you will hear about some of them later as well. This includes that the competitive scheme reveals some of the hurdles and some practical issues regarding certification schemes. The concrete determination of certain volumes that are being traded also includes that we send signals for infrastructure planning. So where is it that infrastructures are needed and which kind of infrastructure is needed? And then also very important, contract templates. As we're actually producing firm contracts through the auction process, we have reusable templates. Not all details of the contract will be published, but some details are, and they can be a starting point for any stakeholder willing to engage in the hydrogen economy. What does this mean for the pilot auction? So far, we have concluded the supply side. So we have these two different parts of the auction. It's a double auction mechanism. And on the supply side, we have had 3 lots. I will talk about them later, where companies and their consortia entered a competition-based procurement process to get 10-year hydrogen purchase agreements. On the other side, we will auction these starting in late 2025, early 2026 to industry. The reason why this part of the auction is still pending is that, of course, first of all, we need to determine the volumes that we can auction. And second, we have done an extensive market consultation on the HSA side as well. And that has revealed that potential off-takers would prefer 1 year ahead auctions in our scheme. Because of the difference that I've shown earlier between the LCOH, the levelized cost of hydrogen, and the willingness to pay from off-takers, there will be a difference that needs to be covered. This difference generally remains with HindGo, the hydrogen intermediary company that is the subsidiary of the H2Global Foundation. As this is a minus business, if you will, it needs to be compensated. And HindGo has achieved support from the federal government of Germany for the pilot auction to cover this difference. To be precise, the federal government of Germany has provided 900 million euros for this pilot auction, which is equally distributed to 3 individual lots. Lot 1 is dedicated to renewable ammonia, which is what we will talk about most today. Lot 2 is ongoing still and is an auction on renewable methanol, while Lot 3 has also been concluded for sustainable aviation fuels. What's notable here is that the support that is involved in this mechanism is being given to HindGo. So not the supplier or the off-taker receives a subsidy, but the intermediary does to compensate the cost of difference. How does this work in practice? This has been a 2-staged auction process, including first a qualification phase that results in a pre-selection of 5 companies to enter the second stage. The second stage, in turn, is the negotiation and bidding phase that results in final bids that are binding, followed by an award for 1 company by design in this pilot auction that will receive the money for the agreed volumes. Let me just briefly say something on why this design has been chosen. The pre-selection of 5 companies is a necessary element so that HindGo can actually negotiate in parallel the conditions for the contract. As all companies are supposed to bid on the same contract conditions, this first needs to be negotiated. In other auctions, this part of the negotiation phase is being conducted after the award has been given. In our case, this is being done at the same time, or being concluded at the same time as the award is decided. This has the added benefit that the company on the other side can simultaneously achieve FID, final investment decisions for the project. Also, because this has been a common misunderstanding, I want to reiterate that the pilot auction by design is a winner-takes-all auction, so one company wins the whole volume. Let's dive into Lot 1. Lot 1 has been started in 2022 and has seen interest from 65 countries where companies wanted to participate in the auction. This has led to a download number that I personally find very impressive of more than 1,300 downloads for the documents that we have prepared in advance of the auction. In the first phase, this auction has seen 22 participating companies that seriously entered the process, and 5 companies were selected, and then 1 company was finally awarded. In terms of the timeline, this is very important to note. So we concluded the auction in July 24, but started in December 22. And what you see here in this process is that it has been a very serious process that nevertheless had a couple of extensions. The extensions in total meant a delay by about 8 months. Why did that happen? This is basically a reflection of the hydrogen market at large, because the hydrogen market still suffers from some childhood sickness, if you will, where the market needs to learn certain things and how they work. And these extensions have mostly been requested by the companies that participated in the process in order to progress their projects to a stage where they could actually agree to the offtake agreements and where they could be sure about the regulations and basically the environment in which they would be able to deliver. What can we say about the results at large? On average, we have been proposed an electrolyzer capacity size of 145 megawatts, which would be accompanied by, on average, 295 megawatts of additional renewable energy capacity. All projects that we have had in the process have proposed alkaline electrolyzers as a technology. 2 of the projects preferred pressurized alkaline electrolysis. The first deliveries are to be expected within 2 to 3 years, and companies were able to choose among ports in Northwestern Europe for the delivery. 1 project preferred to deliver to the port of Antwerp. The other projects have decided that they would go for the port of Rotterdam for delivery. The volumes that have been proposed with the bids vary between 210,000 to 475,000 tons of renewable ammonia, and that includes the range between the guaranteed minimum offtake and additional quantities, because these both were aspects that were what we call award criteria on which the result was chosen. The average bid was targeting 1,048 euros per ton as a price for renewable ammonia, and 81% of that price are the actual product price, with the remaining 19% being comprised of import duties, logistic costs, and transport charges. Now, the winner is H2Global. The project that they have proposed is in Egypt. and comprises a 100 megawatt electrolyzer, which is attached to an extension of an existing ammonia plant and an export terminal, and will be supplied with electricity for the production from 203 megawatts of wind power and 70 megawatts of solar power, which are both additional capacities. H2Global itself is a strategic partnership between ADNOC and OCI Global, is incorporated in Abu Dhabi, and by no means a new player, but instead the largest producer of nitrogen fertilizers in the MENA region. The project is large and includes transport, and therefore there's also a couple of other companies involved in the consortium, including Scatec ASA, Orascom Construction, the Sovereign Fund of Egypt, and the Egyptian Electricity Transmission Company. And geographically, and in terms of economic environment, the project is situated in the Suez Canal economic zone. As a couple of additional benefits, the Egypt Green Hydrogen Project will produce 1,330 jobs in the project's construction and O&M phases, and 30% of the additional capacity will also be available to support energy supply in Egypt locally. What does the contract look like? In terms of timelines, you see that the overall contract duration is 10 years. Construction starts now or fairly soon, and first deliveries are planned in 2027 and will be upheld until 2033. There will be an annual minimum offtake of 40,000 tons of renewable ammonia, which corresponds to an annual purchase budget of 40 million euro. There's also some additional volumes included in this deal that might be made available if additional funds are. H2Global itself has bid at 1,000 euro per ton, including the net product price, transport logistic charges, and import and export duties. Here too, the product price makes up 81% of the overall product price, including or meaning that this is 811 euros per ton, excluding the transport-related costs. As there was a bid cap of 1,280 euro per ton in this auction, this means that we have performed this bid cap by 37%, which is quite remarkable. In terms of transport, that has been mentioned already a couple of times, the initial transport will be done with a local pipeline for ammonia to the export terminal, from where it will be shipped by H2Global International Trading to the port of Rotterdam. For the demand side, this is very important because H2Global will sell standard-sized batches of 500 tons of renewable ammonia from Rotterdam. Of course, volumes and prices are super important for the ramp-up of the hydrogen economy. However, we're doing all of this in order to benefit climate change efforts. And that means that we should also keep in mind a couple of other sustainability requirements. As we're importing in this auction from Egypt to Europe, as a result, the product needs to comply with the European standard for renewable hydrogen, which is laid out in the RED II Delegated Act, RED standing for Renewable Energy Directive. Also, there's of course issues like water supply, where we will have additional sustainability criteria that have been defined by BMWK, the German Ministry for Economics and Climate Action, as the funder of this auction. To make this assessment rigorous, there was an obligation to conduct environmental and social impact assessments in accordance with IFC and World Bank standards. And then there has, of course, also to be a documentation about the contribution to the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. Overall, compared to the conventional production of ammonia via unabated fossil fuels, there will be a 75.5% emission reduction, which is an analogy to saving 60,000 cars per year in terms of emissions. Certification is being done by an external independent group. In this case, it's Gutzert and TÜV Süd, two well-known certification companies. Now, this has been a lot of input on our very successful auction that we are very happy about to see the results. The other auction that has been concluded is Lot 3 on sustainable aviation fuels. This auction, however, has been unsuccessful. So we have not produced a successful awardee. This shows that the overall SAF market is at a very early development stage. The auction itself has been launched at the same time as the other two in the end of 2022. In this case, we have seen interest from only 35 countries to participate in this auction. Part of the reason being that we already know that 2/3 of eSAF projects are located in Europe, and by design, European projects were not allowed to participate in this auction. So we knew that there would be less competition in this auction. However, only 3 companies entered the series qualification phase, and 2 dropped out even before producing indicative bids, and 1 company negotiated a contract with us but did not submit a final binding bid. The important lesson here is why. The 2 companies that dropped out first had indicated that the main reason was regulatory uncertainty. At the point in time where the part of the auctions took place where they were supposed to hand in an indicative bid, there was still a lot of uncertainty about the final content and the final regulation enclosed in the RED II delegated acts. Therefore, they did not know whether their projects would be able to comply with those rules. The second aspect was that for a fully new development of a Fischer-Tropsch plant, which is necessary to produce eSAF, would need a lot of investment, and that the lot size for such a project is just too small. So the formulation that was chosen here was always that the volume of the auction is at the lower end of what project developers would go for at the moment. The final bidder that nevertheless did not submit a final bid again raised regulatory issues, including that the now final version of the RED II Delegated Act requires a proportional allocation of greenhouse gas savings to the different products that come out of a Fischer-Tropsch process. Now, if you know Fischer-Tropsch processes, you know that this process does not only resolve in eSAF, but also a whole battery of different other products, not projects, sorry. Most of these products do not yet have a green market. So the only one that has really a potential to drive the economic viability of this whole process is eSAF at the moment. And therefore, the company said it would be very beneficial if the green quality would be assigned, allocated to only eSAF, with the other products being conventional products in the end. So far on what has been done. What's coming next? Lot 2 on renewable methanol is still ongoing, and the budget that has not been used for Lot 3 has now been reallocated to this lot in order to allow for additional economies of scale. The demand side auctions for Lot 1 are supposed to start in end of 2025, early 2026. And there will be another round of tenders from our mechanism in the future, including a 3.5 billion auction funded by the German government and a 0.6 billion euro auction funded by the Netherlands and Germany in cooperation. These two are in preparation, and the following slide shows you some of the initial ideas that are being considered for this auction. Please note that this overview is based on the official market consultation by the German government that has to be done in accordance with EU law, and does not necessarily reflect the ideas or considerations of H2Global. And it is subject to change because that's the purpose of a market consultation, to test whether the ideas that the government has actually work with market participants. So as you can see here on the map, there will be a couple of regional windows, including a European window, as they call it, which will each have a dedicated budget to them. The precise numbers behind those will still be fixed at some point. Objectives are still supposed to be market creation and helping projects to reach FID. We still want to discover real market prices. And in this case, and that's the reason why there are these regional lots, there is an intent to have a diversification of supply geographies and increase security of supply with clean hydrogen. As we're again targeting offtake on the European market, the renewable fuel rules of the RED II delegated acts still need to apply. Each of the lots might be either vector open or product open. That means that, contrary to how we did it in the pilot auction, where we defined one lot is ammonia, one lot is methanol, one lot is eSAF, this will be done via equivalence, and the rules of how to do this precisely in practice are currently being developed. Delivery will be Germany or the Netherlands, and there will again be an HPA for 10 years with a fixed price if this plan is being realized as is. There will be awarding criteria, including the price per ton of energy and maximum volumes, basic volumes, plus optional quantities that play a role. The marginal bidder in this case is supposed to receive a reduced volume offer to make maximum use of the budget. And it has already been stated a couple of times that this time this will not be a winner-takes-all auction, most likely. The HSA contracts, again, will not be long-term offtake agreements, but significantly shorter, as it is currently the formulation. What can we learn from all of this? The first issue is that lot sizes and contract duration matter. The selected lot sizes that we had in the pilot auction were often cited as at the lower end of what project developers would currently consider to produce economies of scale. And the contract duration should also in the future not only cover delivery times of 7 years, but longer, in order to cover a larger part of the business case of the projects. There were also a lot of regulatory uncertainties to be handled. And this is, I think, one thing that is very important to notice for countries from the global south, because projects that are developed to export to Europe or any other developed country or jurisdiction would need to consider the regulation on the target market and start doing that early. The interpretation of the European Delegated Acts is still fairly new. Market participants are still learning of how to do this. This includes, for example, how to handle electricity markets in the bidding countries. This is a brief excursus. So the European Delegated Acts require project developers that want to have renewable qualities to the projects, that there is some form of bidding zones in the markets if you don't have an off-grid production site. We can talk about this later in the questions, but generally this is something that does not apply to all countries, because there might be countries that don't work with bidding zones. There might be countries that have a monopolized structure in the power sector. So there might be all kinds of barriers to apply these rules. Additionally, for some of the derivatives of clean hydrogen, there is a carbon source needed. So, for example, for methanol or eSAF, and making sure that these carbon sources are also considered sustainable is very important. Finally, what we have also noticed in the process is that a lot of project developers struggled with securing port infrastructure access for hydrogen and its derivatives. Now, the auctions that we're doing under the H2Global framework hopefully send some of the signals that will help to remedy some of these shortcomings of the market at the moment, and some of these bottlenecks need to be resolved. However, there needs to be still an engagement with port authorities and the companies active in ports to make sure that these infrastructures for import and export are actually present for the projects. HINTCO will do this for the auctions so far through contractual arrangements. On the positive note, we have seen a really strong commitment of the bidders. The bidders have been very serious about their projects and very engaged, very constructive in trying to find solutions for some of these regulatory uncertainties, some of these uncertainties that are attached to allocating risk in the contractual framework. And they have highly appreciated in general the readiness of HINTCO as a stakeholder that actually wants to and is ready to enter contracts that offtake supply. This is also super important for the demand side eventually, because the demand side now has an entity that is ready to sell clean hydrogen. The quantities, of course, compared to natural gas markets are still small, but we need to start. And for that, there is now an entity that can actually start selling these quantities. And now I'm looking very much forward to the comments, to the questions from the audience.
Thank you very much, Jan, for this excellent presentation. We have some questions that colleagues have put in the chat, so maybe we can start with those. And also for those colleagues that have some questions and would like to ask them directly, if you could raise your hand, and we will also open the space for you. I am seeing Jan frozen, but I do not know if I'm the only one, Michelle.
Yes, I'm seeing him frozen as well. We hear really well, but the image is frozen.
Okay, then I'll just restart my camera real quick.
You are frozen in a good picture, Jan. It was not a bad one, so...
At least.
So also before we start the session of Q&A, I want to thank H2Global Foundation because they are one of the new members of the H4D partnership. And this webinar is also possible due to the efforts that the Hydrogen for Development Initiative has developed and of the deliverables that we have as team. And I also see we have several H4D partners connected today, so thank you very much for joining us in this session. I don't see Jean, but I hope you can hear us, right?
I hear you very well, and for me,
Okay.
nothing is frozen. That's a bit irritating, but well, maybe my camera is starting again at some point.
Okay. We have several questions, but I would like to start with the most general and then going to the most specific ones. So one first question that we have is on who is driving this effort. Is it the German government that designed H2Global and has the process being benefited from lessons learned from Germany's successful ramp up on solar energy? And also related to that is the question on why there have been like these pre-qualified processes during the second auction, and is there foreseeing that you would be seeing more companies participating? And maybe we can start with those two and we can go with the rest in the next batch of questions.
Sure. I'm very happy to answer the question on who's driving this process. So it's a common misconception that H2Global was invented by the German government or designed by the German government. It's not. The whole concept has been invented basically literally over a beer by Timo Bollerhey and Markus Exenberger, the two chairs or two of the chairs of the foundation and Hindco. And they have suggested this first because they're German citizens to the German government, which found the idea very intriguing and was ready to fund a first pilot auction. This also means that H2Global as a mechanism is fully open to any country or any philanthropy that wants to provide some funds for this mechanism and create its own tender for hydrogen, be it a connection like, let me just creatively think about it, something like importing clean hydrogen from Australia to Japan or importing it from, let's say, India to the US. This is all something that we are very happy to talk about. So the German, we very much appreciate the German involvement in this process, and we are based as an organization here in Hamburg, but it's not a German-driven aspect. Basically, what we do is we provide this mechanism, which is also adaptable and flexible to certain needs that countries have, because they might prefer a particular technology, or they might be interested in designing it more openly. That we are very ready to adapt, and we provide this mechanism and implement it for any country that is interested. Then in terms of the next auction, here it's very important to note that we will likely start the next round of tenders early next year on the supply side. As we're having a much larger budget this time, so 3.5 billion, discounting the joint Dutch-German window, we of course think that there will be more companies that get involved. We also have these different regional windows, most likely. This includes that we expect more participation from different regions that might have found themselves at a disadvantage in the pilot auction. We will have a direct comparison though, because the German-Dutch window or auction is a global one, most likely. So there will be a comparison for the participation in these different tenders, in these different lots. Yes, so participation, we expect and hope for broader participation once the details are out.
Thank you very much, Jan. And also going further on the upcoming rounds of bidding, there are some questions here on, can you provide more details on how the hydrogen derivatives were chosen? And are you considering an auction for other hydrogen derivatives?
So for the pilot auction, there was a very clear rationale behind the choice, being infrastructure. So infrastructures for clean hydrogen and its derivatives are not yet widely available. However, especially ammonia and methanol, and even more clearly SAF, which is basically a different term for a renewable kerosene, has infrastructures that are known. Ammonia has been traded for decades, and so has methanol via shipping. So for this type of import projects that were preferred for the pilot auction, this made sense to use that to avoid some of the infrastructure questions that are faced when trying to transport pure hydrogen molecules. Now that the market has developed a little further and that we have had our experiences in this simplified setting, the choice was to rather go with product open approaches to really leverage market forces, meaning leveraging the competition between different providers and see which derivative basically comes out on top.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jan, for those thorough responses. Also going now on the implementation, we have a question. Does the H2Global option offer flexible production thresholds during the project ramp-up period?
It can be designed that way. So this depends. So as I said, per se, the mechanism is very flexible. The contract design can also be adapted in future auctions. And if you paid attention to that slide where I had the annual volumes that are being traded, you might have noticed that the volume for 2027 is lower than for the following years.
Thank you, Jan. And we have two related to time. And the first one is if you could elaborate a little bit further on the rationale behind the duration of the contract and why the contract was awarded for a period of 7 years for H2Global as compared to the 10-year period that was published in the official auction.
Could you repeat the first question because I had a hiccup in the audio?
Sure. If you could provide some further information on what was the rationale behind the duration of the contract period, both for the short term and the long term, if you could provide some additional thoughts on that, please.
So regarding the duration of the contract, the 10 years are a mixture between trying to provide a long-term offtake contract and the fiscal realities of countries. Countries have, as funders in this scheme, a very crucial role as they cover the cost of difference. And usually the midterm budgetary planning of countries will allow them for up to 10 years to engage in subsidy schemes. This can, of course, vary. This is not necessarily fixed, but this is what in this first case was agreed to do. Because there's a principle in budgetary laws in many countries, including Germany, that budgets are generally annual budgets, and then there might be some midterm planning, but the commitment can be a bit tricky for long-term aspects. So that's one aspect for that. Why 7 years instead of 10 years? I would say this is a learning from the process and also a matter of communication in the process of setting all of this up. So in the future, we will try to have actual deliveries for 10 years. While this was set up and being green-lighted by the EU Commission as a subsidy scheme, there was a communication about these 10 years, but the construction phase has not been included in this original proposal, which meant that the construction phase needed to be included in the 10 years. And that's the reason why it is the way in the pilot auction. For the short-term offtake side, we are very aware that half of the market is trying to get long-term offtake agreements because they need the volume security. At the same time, a lot of market participants try to reap the expected benefits from falling prices of clean hydrogen and refrain still from committing to long-term offtake agreements. So this is the other half of that market. And I would say from the conversations and from the data we have, this is pretty much really half and half of the market, trying to get the short term or trying to get the long-term offtake agreements. The rationale for us is why we're gunning for the short-term contracts on the demand side is that we try to produce many price signals. If we have these standard-sized, smaller units that are being traded, that means that we have more data points available that can signal the snapshot in that year what off-takers are willing to pay for clean hydrogen derivatives. This is very important because the price signals here show to other off-takers that want to transform towards a carbon neutral production what the competition looks like. Although we will not publish, of course, the individual bids of the companies that bid in the demand side, but it's a very important signal what the competition does. And for the suppliers, it indicates the price range that they not need to go for in the mid to long term. So basically, this signal is, this is where we can actually sell clean hydrogen or its derivatives without subsidies. That's the idea. That's also the idea why the mechanism was designed in a way that the intermediary receives the subsidy, because we get cleaner price signals on both the supply and demand side. As you noticed, we have very transparently published prices of the supplier and the winning bid, at least. For the offtake, this will be also important pricing signal. It will inform where they would like to, or at which level they would like to bid initially, and more importantly, even for the suppliers, it means this is the direction of pricing where we actually need to go, because all the clean hydrogen willingness to pay calculations that you can find in studies at the moment are based on assumptions, and they're based on calculations and modeling, and they're not based on transparent markets, because there's not an exchange-based market for these kinds of products. You're muted.
Thank you very much, Jan, for your responses. I think they clarify very thoroughly the aspects that you have been addressing. And taking also the opportunity that I'm moderating this session, I wanted to ask you regarding the contracts, as this is something very relevant for all the players. In these model contracts that you have been developing, are there any specific clauses or any specific terms that you could identify and that they are really essential to mitigate some of the risks. For example, delays or lack of capacity to provide to comply with the contract that you have identified as part of the work that you are doing in H2 Global Foundation?
Now, generally speaking, of course, the clauses, especially on delays and the inability to deliver at some point, are super crucial clauses. At this point in time, I cannot share the details on these clauses, but rest assured, before the new round of tenders is started, there will be a publication of a template, so to say, that contains some of these clauses to make sure that there is something to work from in the end. And this will, of course, contain a lot of the learnings that the HintGo colleagues have had in the initial auctions. But at this point in time, I cannot directly comment on some of the clauses. I have not seen some of them myself, to be very transparent about this, because as the foundation is a non-profit, both practically and legally speaking, and HintGo is legally speaking a for-profit entity, we need to maintain what we internally call a firewall that prevents us from giving the donors to the foundation an unfair advantage in the HintGo auctions. So that also means that as I work for the foundation, I will also not receive some information from the auctions so that it's prevented that I tell anyone about it.
We totally understand, John. So maybe I will read this question, but might have some of the same, might be in the same line of response. But a colleague is asking, what condition precedents are in the contract? So are there condition precedents around RED 3 being transposed, on infrastructure being implemented, for example, the backbone, etc.?
There are some clauses on these things. As I said earlier, there is going to be a contractual framework that HintGo organizes to make sure that there is capacities to actually physically take the product to the port. But again, on these details, I unfortunately cannot comment directly.
Thank you, Jan. We definitely understand it. I don't see any further question in our chat, and I don't see anyone raising their hand. So maybe we ask our colleagues if they have some burning question to raise their hand, please. And Michelle, please
Yes,
go
thank you
ahead.
very much. And thank you very much for the presentation. I have a few questions. Yeah, I think more for reflection. One is about the results, the first results we have, right? We see that even if it's a supply, it's still the first part of the auction, the supply side, the who wins, it's a fertilizer industry, right? And one of the things you have been discussed a lot, it's about where is the demand, what's the first movers on the demand side. So I want to hear about your reflections about this result, in the sense that for me there's two things that comes to mind. One is basically this idea that even if you have a supply project looking on exporting some level of demand and some level of industry, as you mentioned as well, that there is some renewables inside of the country, it needs to have a project that combine different elements of it, that it makes the project more solid. What I would love to hear from your side, what you think about that. And the second one, it's about this part of the demand itself, because hearing that you have more than 20 supplies or bids that was looked at, and this one in the end 5 and this one win, it give us a little bit a hint about what kind of suppliers, what they are related, what the industry they are coming from. So what do you think that it may means about the demand, even if I understand that's the supply side, this combination about how we can have a solid project? And what kind of industry are related with that. And also you show that actually it's not just one industry, it's a partnership with different players. So what we can have as lesson about how we strengthen a project, to make this happen.
I think that's a very good set of questions. Let me start from the aspect of consortia. So the issue that we had multiple companies involved in this winning project is related to the aspect that we said the supply side of the auction covers everything from the production to the delivery at an agreed port. They could choose the port, but generally there's a port within a certain geography that you can choose. And then we need to organize the supply chain basically until that point. That means the projects here had to basically be vertically integrated from the producer to the transport side, at least until the point of transaction in the port. From that point on, we will have the other side, which also means that the demand side needs to include a part of the transport from that port to their offtake site where they actually use the derivative. What's very important about that is that these consortia basically assume the role to allocate risk among themselves. So these parts of the supply chain risks are closely allocated from the mechanism point of view in the whole supply side of the auction. And then the bidders are basically forced to organize risk allocation within that. The benefit from this is that this is a force on the participants that does not necessarily occur outside. So in the market out there, we hear voices that it's partially hard to get a transport company to commit or to get a supplier to commit sufficiently to organize these transports. So here they have to commit to a certain degree. In terms of other aspects that make the project work, that also includes that we have set fairly strict standards in terms of what type of company can participate in the auctions, what we call pre-qualification criteria. This includes a certain minimum turnover. This includes a sufficiently trained and large staff. This includes previous experience with, in this case, ammonia projects in the past. So similar aspects pertain to the other two lots as well, just derivative specific. But there is some experience in the consortium with first producing the derivative and then handling and transporting the derivative. This implies that in this first auction, there was basically a reliance on players that are experienced in this field. Future auctions might tune these down a little bit, these criteria, in order to allow for new players that are renewable, so to say, from the get-go. But the pre-qualification criteria that we had in place initially basically meant that bigger experienced companies will win this. So for the ammonia sector, that implies that likely a fertilizer company or someone who's already busy in this field will win an auction on ammonia if you apply these kinds of experience criteria. For us, it was, however, super important for these pilot auctions, and this is super important to keep in mind. We're in an early market phase still. So it's important that some projects really take off and really come to fruition. That's why these criteria were important, so that we could actually make a case and that we could actually go ahead and get the supply chain started. And I hope I now answered all of the questions. I have a feeling I forgot one aspect.
No, I think that was great. Thank you very much. And I have another one looking on how this hydrogen will be arriving in Europe, right? Because as you showed, there is two potential entry points. And then the demand, we don't know where they are. We still don't know locally where they are. And what I understand, and please correct me if I misunderstood it, is that we are thinking that they came from in German or Netherlands port, and then they will be using pipelines to achieve the demand, to reach the different potential demand, which the contract will be much shorter term. So I was considering two challenges on that, because one thing you mentioned, it's about the infrastructure, right? We expect that this kind of market and contracts can give us some guidance about where the infrastructure will be necessary. And one thing that for me raised some questions is that we don't know exactly where the demand will be placed geographically. This could be a challenge. Moreover, if you think about the regulatory model, right, we have all this discussion about how the pipeline will be regulated. And as we know how it is on natural gas, and we see that there is a tendency on look on hydrogen pipelines as essential facility as well. So I want to hear about your feeling and your expectation about to have hearing on the discussion in Europe. If we're going to the same direction, it means that the idea is to use European pipelines as some kind of a hub, you know, in a sense that the gas, the hydrogen will be arriving, and they could be sold anywhere in Europe, and what it would mean in terms of about regulation, because it would mean that we need to have some regulator that allows this investment and the remuneration of this asset. So I want to hear a little bit about your thoughts about this decision of using the ports as an entry point, and how it's the challenge to the localization of the demand, and how is it relate with the regulation of the pipelines.
Yeah.
I know that are several questions as well, but I guess you get the idea.
Yeah, I would distinguish a couple of things here. So first of all, the initial infrastructure signal that we're sending with the mechanism is through the long-term contract on the supply side, because it means that port authorities and companies active in the port of Rotterdam in this case know, okay, there's this amount of clean hydrogen coming. We need infrastructure for this throughout these 7 years of delivery. So that's the first signal. The second aspect needs to be distinguished between the auction that we have been concluding now and the ones that are coming. The one that is concluded is based on selling derivatives directly. This also means that the demand side will likely be companies, and not just likely, I would say pretty sure, are companies that can use ammonia or methanol directly. Simply because the off-takers would still need to do the reconversion of the derivative for these existing auctions. For the coming auctions, where we will have product open or vector open auctions, most likely, there will be some party that needs to include the reconversion or cracking facilities in order to make it happen. So what's important here is that the year ahead auctions for some non-pipeline transport will allow some planning, because there's a year in between. For the pipelines, of course, the backbone is very crucial. It will be informed about certain capacities that are being needed over the period of delivery. And that will be great. Of course, because the pipelines cannot be adjusted just on an annual basis, this is something where the argument about the infrastructure signal does not fully apply. I would admit that much. But for the port capacities, it's super important. And then there's, of course, the difference for derivatives and than pure hydrogen, which will be very different. And that's why we would first expect among the off-takers companies like fertilizer producers or chemical industries that can directly use ammonia in this case.
Thank you. Carolina, do you have we have another question, or should we move to the final part of this section?
We don't have any more questions in the chat, and I don't see any other hands raised. So I believe we can conclude the Q&A session.
Thank you very much. And here, I think my role, it's quite easy because Ian covered a lot of things, and he also did a conclusion when he was doing the presentation of the key elements that we should keep in mind as lessons, and also how to move forward related with these auctions. And also he showed us how it's related with the different regions. I think it's quite interesting to understand this relationship with how the auction has also been designed in the sense to guarantee the security of supply in the long term, and the relationship between the characteristic of this auction and the contracts as we know then on natural gas and renewables, and how actually they are learning from these different industries and putting together on this process. I just want to thank you very much, Ian, for the presentation. It was a really great and very interesting. I think we still have a lot of questions because it's a moving process, and I hope you will have the opportunity to discuss this again in a few months with the next steps of this process. We will see, we are really curious to see how the demand side of it will be going, and also I think it's quite interesting how, because you're not just closing the gap on the price cost that we need to pay, but you're trying to close the gap on the time period as well. Because with the supply side, they always want to have the longest contract that they want. The demand side, usually they want to have more flexibility. So how to match this gap, and also without the need of investment on infrastructure. So I think that's a really interesting pilot and example, and you give a lot of lessons to learn to different policymakers that are thinking about how to promote the clean hydrogen industry. So I just want to thank you everybody who is here and doing the question and entering this discussion with us. And especially you, and we keep engaged and discussing this kind of topics and questions in the future. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Jan. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you. Bye.